The room fell silent as I exposed my mother's betrayal. My billionaire husband stepped forward, and the truth shattered 40 years of a perfect family lie. Hey there. Thanks for clicking on today's story. Maybe you're commuting, folding laundry, or just lying in bed with your headphones on. Wherever you are, I hope you're ready because this one's a ride. Today's story follows a woman who thought she had it all. The name, the legacy, the promise of a perfect life. Until the people who raised her decided to control her the only way they knew how, by breaking her. Have you ever felt trapped by expectations? Silenced by the very people who should have lifted you up? If so, this story might hit a little closer to home. Stick around to see how she flipped the script and reclaimed a life that was never truly hers to begin with. And hey, if this kind of raw, real storytelling means something to you, please hit that subscribe button. It keeps this space alive, and it helps me bring more stories that matter to people like you. Thanks for being here. Now let's begin.
My name is Elena Worthington, and I was born with a silver spoon shoved so far down my throat I didn't realize I was choking until I tried to breathe on my own. I used to believe legacy was everything. The Worthingtons of Boston, real estate tycoons, old money royalty in Beacon Hill were supposed to be untouchable. I was the poised daughter, the one who did everything right. Princeton undergrad, Columbia MBA, debutante balls, charity galas, and the kind of resume that made Ivy League parents beam at their cocktail parties. But what none of them saw coming was me standing under a spotlight in a red silk gown that defied every rule my mother drilled into me, about to burn down everything they spent 4 decades building, with just my voice and a flash drive. And it all started with a fight over a lipstick. 6 months ago, I was the keynote speaker at the Helena Rowan Foundation's Winter Charity Auction, an exclusive event my mother Vivian Worthington co-chaired every year. The theme was grace and gratitude, 2 traits my mother claimed to embody, and I tried desperately to understand. My assistant had picked a plum red lip color for my speech. Bold, powerful, a little dangerous. My mother hated it. Elena, no daughter of mine wears that shade in front of board members. You'll look like a social climber. Go change. Her words sliced like they always did. Silk wrapped around a dagger. I refused. And so, in front of Boston's most elite, she took the microphone right before I stepped on stage and announced I had food poisoning. I stood there, stunned, as Claudia Monroe, my so-called best friend, took my place, reading a script I had written. Perfect enunciation, perfect dress, perfect betrayal. I smiled, I waved, and I died a little inside. That night, I went back to my penthouse and smashed a $2,000 crystal decanter. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood. I was just a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. I didn't go quietly. 3 weeks later, I launched Nova, a luxury lingerie line inspired by confidence, not compliance. Lace, structure, sensuality. Pieces meant to make women feel powerful without apology. Claudia, of course, wanted in. She invested, she brought in influencers, she helped me launch a viral campaign on TikTok. And for once in my life, I wasn't Elena Worthington, daughter of Harold and Vivian. I was just Elena, ambitious, raw, real. The media called it a bold departure from the Worthington mold. My mother called it a disgrace to the family legacy. But sales spiked. We got features in Vogue, Harper's, even a podcast mention from a Kardashian. Until one morning, everything disappeared. The website was offline, the bank accounts frozen, inventory gone. I rushed to the office, only to find Claudia had cleared out overnight and taken everything, including $340,000 in investor funds. The police shrugged, the lawyers shrugged. Claudia, it turns out, wasn't even Claudia. Her real name was Rebecca Chan, and she'd pulled the same stunt in 3 other cities under 3 different aliases. But what gutted me more than the theft was my parents' reaction. "You should have known better," my father barked at the dinner table, gripping his bourbon glass. "We build legacies, not lingerie." "You've embarrassed us publicly, Elena," my mother added, barely looking up from her phone. "You chose failure. Now you must live with the consequences." They stripped everything overnight. My penthouse? Gone. Technically owned by Worthington Holdings. My cards? Canceled. My name? Frozen out of every boardroom I once graced. And then they offered a lifeline. Or rather, a leash. "You'll marry Graham Foster," my mother declared one morning, sliding a printed LinkedIn profile across the table. "He's the son of our attorney. Quiet, steady, unremarkable. He's willing to marry you, despite your setbacks." Setbacks? That's what she called betrayal, humiliation, and identity collapse? "And if I say no, then you leave with nothing, not even the family name." I laughed, a real, full-bodied, hysterical laugh. "This isn't the 1800s, Mother." She didn't blink. "No, darling. In the 1800s, at least we called them dowries." The first time I met Graham, he drove up in a 2009 Honda Civic, wore a gray suit that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack, and shook my hand like we were sealing a real estate deal. No charm, no arrogance, just a nod and a quiet, "Nice to meet you, Elena." I hated him on sight. He took me to a mid-tier Italian restaurant, he ordered water, and then he said something I didn't expect. "I know you don't want this," he said, "but I think we can make it work. Quietly, cleanly, no expectations." I stared at him. "That's your pitch? A quiet, clean arrangement?" He shrugged. "Better than screaming matches and scandal, isn't it?" It wasn't until later that night, when I snuck into his home office and saw the 3-monitor setup running live global stock feeds, that I realized something was off. Graham Foster was not who he claimed to be. 3 days after our arranged dinner, I moved into Graham Foster's apartment. I was assigned to it, like a student assigned to dormitory housing. The building was a converted factory in South Boston. Charming in theory, depressing in execution. The walls were painted a beige so bland it could be sold as neutral trauma. The furniture? Functional, soulless, carefully chosen by my mother, right down to the twin beds she insisted were practical for now. "This isn't a home," I muttered, dragging my 2 allowed suitcases inside. "It's a holding cell with dish soap." Graham glanced up from his laptop. "It's temporary." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "No," he said flatly, "just accurate." He left early every morning in the same dented Civic, wearing one of 3 interchangeable suits. He'd return around 7, eat in silence, disappear into his office, and reemerge around midnight smelling like espresso and spreadsheets. I was too proud to ask questions, and too exhausted to care. My days were equally degrading. As part of the redemption package, I was given an entry-level admin job at Worthington Group, working in the basement level with no windows and no hope. I fetched coffee for interns who used to follow me on Instagram. My supervisor, a bitter divorcee named Sharon, took special pleasure in reminding me to dress modestly and file properly. The whispers in the office were relentless. "Is that her? Thought she moved to Europe." Nope, she tanked her business and got demoted. Word is her dad arranged a marriage to keep her from going full Britney. I stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria after week 2. The locked door. The only mystery in my bleak routine was Graham's office. The door was always locked, but one night I heard him inside, not typing, but speaking. Not his usual monotone either. His voice was commanding, sharp, and fluent in French. I froze. He was on a Zoom call. Something about market saturation in Southeast Asia and a strategic pivot for Q3. This was not paralegal chatter. I pressed my ear to the door. Tell Zurich to hold on the merger until the Berlin office confirms liquidity. We'll push the memo to London at 8 a.m. EST. The next morning, I followed him, discreetly, or so I thought, but he didn't go to a law firm. He drove to a steel and glass high-rise downtown, scanned a keycard, and disappeared inside a building labeled Helios Strategies. I Googled it. Nothing. Just a landing page. Private capital, private clients, private vision. Whatever that meant. The TikTok confessional. That night, after microwaving leftover pad thai, I snapped. I opened my phone, turned the camera on, and whispered, "Hi, I'm Elena. I used to be the poster girl for perfection. Now I make $18 an hour typing memos in a windowless basement while my husband locks himself in a secret office." I didn't show my face. I distorted my voice. But the internet? It recognized pain. Within 48 hours, my TikTok had 2.3 million views. Tell us more about the fake marriage. Girl, blink twice if your mom's a narcissist. You're the Boston girl with the lingerie scandal, aren't you? I didn't respond, but I kept posting, not for sympathy, but because it was the only thing that felt mine. Graham never said a word about it. The reveal. 3 weeks into our Cold War cohabitation, I came home late to find his office door ajar. It was the first time I saw what was inside. 3 curved monitors, a Bloomberg terminal, a walnut desk with brass detailing, and a glass wall displaying market analytics in real time. The room looked nothing like the rest of the apartment. This space was not decorated. It was engineered. And Graham, my boring gray-suited husband, stood in front of the screens wearing a tailored navy suit and no tie, his hair slightly tousled, sleeves rolled. He looked powerful. "Your office is very Wall Street for a junior paralegal," I said softly. He didn't flinch. "I'm not a paralegal." "No kidding. Who are you?" He paused, then pulled open a drawer and handed me a magazine, an old issue of Forbes. The cover, "The Billionaire Nobody Knows," inside Helios Strategies' secret CEO. My blood ran cold. No. Yes. Graham Foster is G. Jeff, the founder? He nodded. I didn't lie. I just let assumptions fill the gaps. I sat down on his leather chair. Why marry me? His reply was calm. "Let's just say, I had business to settle with your family, and I wanted to see who you really were, without the Worthington name in lights." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the twin bed across the room from Graham's, staring at the water-stained ceiling and wondering how I had ended up married to a man who operated a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm under a pseudonym while I answered phones for a department I once helped design. He didn't try to explain further. He didn't apologize for the deception. He simply said, "You needed to find out when you were ready," and retreated back into the glow of his monitors. Meanwhile, my entire sense of reality began to shift. The next morning, he left earlier than usual, his chair still warm, his screens off, his scent, that subtle cedar and something darker, lingering in the hallway. I wandered into his office again. It wasn't just the wealth that overwhelmed me. It was the precision, the quiet calculation. Every book was annotated, every note tabbed. There were documents signed in languages I didn't recognize, and charts that made my MBA degree look like a coloring book. And tucked between 2 legal pads was a copy of my boutique's original pitch deck, highlighted, marked up, with a sticky note that simply said, "Potential, undervalued." He'd studied me. Not just as a person, but as an investment. That pissed me off more than anything. By noon, I found myself riding the T downtown, heels clacking against concrete like a declaration of war. I didn't know where I was going until I ended up at the Worthington Tower, 24 stories of polished glass and generational lies. I needed answers, not from Graham, but from the people who had orchestrated my failure. My parents weren't in the office. Of course not. They had people for that. But I knew where to find their fixer. Vincent Burke, my father's longtime consigliere, the man who made unpleasantness disappear faster than old money could cover up a scandal. He was in a corner office on the 15th floor, surrounded by oil paintings and cigars he didn't actually smoke. "Elena," he said, startled when I walked in unannounced, "you look recovered." "Cut the crap, Vincent. I know you vouched for Claudia, or Rebecca, or whatever name she's using now." His smile didn't fade, but his jaw clenched. "You should be careful about making accusations you can't prove." "Oh, I can prove them, or at least I will. So unless you want your name tied to a multi-state fraud scheme, I suggest you tell me everything." He leaned back slowly. "Your mother gave the order. I was just the mechanism. She thought if you failed publicly, you'd be easier to control, less independent." My breath caught. She sabotaged her own daughter's business? She saw it as a necessary correction. You were pulling away, building something without the family name. That doesn't work in your mother's world. I left the office feeling like I'd been gutted. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. I walked for hours after that, past the boutiques I used to shop at, the cafes I once called meetings in, the gallery where I had hosted my brand's soft launch. The city was a museum of who I used to be, and I was a ghost walking through it. That night, I found Graham sitting on the floor of the apartment, surrounded by spreadsheets and takeout boxes from a Japanese place I hadn't been able to afford since the scandal. "You knew," I said. "I suspected." "For how long?" "Before we were married." "And you didn't tell me?" His eyes didn't flinch. "Because you weren't ready to hear it. I didn't need you to believe me. I needed you to believe yourself." I sat down across from him, between a box of gyoza and a half-full glass of whiskey. "You used our marriage as a way to infiltrate my family?" "Yes." "And I was the asset?" "Not entirely. You were also unexpected." The silence that followed was heavier than anger, thicker than betrayal, and somehow more intimate than any of the forced conversations we'd had before. We ate in silence, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was truce, of some kind. The next morning, I found an envelope on my makeshift desk. No note, just a name and an address. Marjorie Lynn. I Googled her. Former CIA analyst, current strategic advisor to Helios Strategies, Graham's mentor. That afternoon, I took the train to her townhouse in Cambridge. She opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been expecting me. "Elena," she said, appraising me like a recruiter sizing up talent. I wondered how long it would take. We sat in a room filled with books and bonsai trees. She poured tea without asking and said, "Your boutique wasn't just viable, it was visionary. You were 6 months from breaking even. You had influencer momentum, but someone pulled the plug." "I know," I whispered. "It was my mother." She nodded. "But you didn't break. That's what matters now." Marjorie offered me something that no one, not even Graham, had given me so far. A plan. "We can build again. Not for them, not for redemption, but for you. You've got the spark. You just need insulation, structure. You need to learn how the game works and how to beat them at it." I left her house with a folder full of data, a USB drive full of evidence, and something I hadn't felt in months: direction. When I got home, Graham was standing at the window, phone in hand. He turned toward me, almost smiling. "How was Cambridge?" he asked. I handed him the folder. "She's in." And so was I. You don't realize how much you've been surviving until someone hands you a blueprint and says, "Now we build." Marjorie didn't treat me like a charity case or some rich girl who got burned playing entrepreneur. She treated me like an asset, and for the first time in months, I didn't resent it. I needed someone who didn't flinch at ugly truths, someone who could say, "Here's what they did, now here's how we destroy the illusion." Graham transformed our apartment overnight. Our pathetic beige living room became a war room. Flip charts lined the walls. LED task lights replaced the overhead gloom. A whiteboard mapped out connections between Claudia Monroe, Vincent Burke, and shell companies with names so generic they may as well have been hiding in plain sight. Every night after our day jobs, his at Helios, mine still at the Worthington basement office, we trained. I wasn't just learning business strategy, I was being taught how to weaponize it, how to tear down a legacy without firing a single shot. Your mother built her power through control and curated image, Marjorie told me during one of our sessions. So you take control by owning your truth and broadcasting it on your terms. But how do I make them listen? I asked. Graham looked up from his laptop. You don't. You make it impossible for them not to. We planned everything, not just the exposure, but the delivery, the setting, the audience. This wasn't revenge. This was a controlled narrative detonation. And the perfect opportunity arrived, wrapped in ivory stationery and gilded font. Mr. and Mrs. Harold Worthington request the honor of your presence at their 40th wedding anniversary gala. I could practically hear my mother's smug satisfaction radiating from the cardstock, a reminder that they were still in control, that despite everything, they still ruled the game. But they had no idea I was about to flip the board. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked like I was possessed. Graham brought in a legal team from Helios to ensure every piece of evidence we had was airtight. Marjorie coached me through speech prep and emotional rehearsals, teaching me how to hold eye contact when accusing a parent of betrayal. Nathan Reed, Helios's head of security, swept the gala venue 3 times for hidden recorders and leaks. Meanwhile, I reached out to someone I never thought I'd trust again, my sister. Isabel had always lived in my shadow. At least, that's what our mother made us believe. But now, with her career stalled, her relationships policed, and her every move analyzed, I could see that the only difference between us was time. I texted her, "Coffee, no pressure, no handlers." She responded in less than a minute. "I thought you'd never ask." We met at a quiet bookstore cafe in the South End, the kind of place we used to sneak off to in high school when we were still allies instead of chess pieces. She ordered peppermint tea, I got black coffee. We sat in silence for a while before she whispered, "I know about Claudia. I found the emails. I wasn't supposed to see them, but Mom left her iPad open one night." My stomach twisted. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was afraid of her, of what she'd do to me if she thought I was taking your side." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not on my side, Izzy. You're on the truth's." We talked for 2 hours about growing up under Vivian's curated tyranny, about the lies we were forced to smile through, and about the shame of realizing we were pawns in a machine that never saw us as people. She didn't agree to help, but she didn't walk away either. That was enough. 2 days before the gala, Graham surprised me. "This might be premature," he said, pulling a slim black box from the inside pocket of his jacket, "but I'd rather be honest than strategic for once." Inside was a simple silver ring. No diamond, no brand name, just a quiet promise. "I don't want this to be about arrangements anymore," he said. "I want it to be a choice. Yours." I looked at him, not the billionaire CEO or the strategic mastermind, but the man who sat beside me night after night, teaching me how to rebuild myself, not just the plan. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just took his hand and said, "Let's finish what we started." The night of the gala arrived like a storm wrapped in designer tulle. My mother had spared no expense. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, custom floral arrangements, and an LED screen cycling through slides of curated Worthington history, charity events, political fundraisers, society weddings, everything except the damage underneath. I wore a gown by Olivia Chen, a local designer my mother once mocked for being too independent. The dress was ink black, minimalistic, sleeveless, a mirror to my rage and my restraint. My hair was down, no pearls, no smile. We arrived late, not rudely, but noticeably. Graham walked beside me in a tailored tux that probably cost more than my old apartment, though he wore it like armor, not ornament. The room hushed when we entered. Cameras clicked. A few gasps. I caught Delilah Whitmore blinking rapidly, clutching her clutch like a life raft. My mother approached, lips stretched into a gracious lie. "Elena, you look striking." "Thank you," I said. "So do you." She tilted her head. "Graham, we've heard such interesting things about your firm lately." "Rumors travel fast," he replied with a cool smile, "but truth travels faster." My father appeared behind her, whiskey in hand, red in the face, but still playing the patriarch. "It's good to have the family together again," he declared to no one in particular. I looked him straight in the eye. Not for long. And that's when the lights dimmed. The screen flickered. The microphone passed to the podium. And I took my first step toward the stage. The ballroom felt colder under the spotlight. Not physically, the temperature remained a perfectly curated 71 degrees, but emotionally, atmospherically, chilling in a way no thermostat could measure. It was the silence that did it, the kind that only comes when everyone smells a storm just seconds before it hits. I stood at the podium, the mic warm beneath my palm, my heart thudding with the force of every memory that had brought me here. My parents were seated front and center, champagne flutes in hand, expressions halfway between polite curiosity and performative pride. They expected a daughter's toast, a sweet olive branch. I could feel the weight of that expectation pressing on my spine. I smiled. Not kindly. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate 40 years of Harold and Vivian Worthington, 4 decades of success, of curated grace, of legacy." A soft ripple of applause followed. They didn't know what they were clapping for yet, but they would. I inhaled, sharp, deep, purposeful. "For most of my life, I believed in stories," I continued. "The story that my family was built on integrity. The story that success came from tradition. The story that we were untouchable." Eyes locked on me now, phones lowered. My mother's fingers went white around her glass stem. But stories, like mirrors, eventually crack. And when they do, you're left staring at a reflection that no longer smiles back. I reached into the folds of my gown and pulled out a small remote. The ballroom screens behind me lit up in sequence. First slide, a financial chart. Second slide, a transaction log from the Veronica Worthington Foundation. Third slide, Claudia Monroe's alias registry. The crowd stiffened. For those unfamiliar, these documents detail the movement of $280,000 from my mother's foundation to a series of shell companies, I said, letting each word land like a hammer. These funds were funneled, with precision, to a woman named Claudia Monroe, who also went by Rebecca Chan, Renee Marshall, and Colette Drake, a woman my mother introduced to me as a potential partner for my first business venture. The room erupted in gasps. Whispers turned heads. My father's mouth opened, then closed again like a fish pulled from water. Claudia, or whichever name you prefer, disappeared with hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment money, leaving me publicly humiliated and financially ruined. The media called it a lapse in judgment. My family called it a necessary lesson. I paused and looked directly at my mother. Her expression had calcified. "What no one knew," I said, "was that this lesson was orchestrated, that my own parents hired the fraud who torpedoed my life just to teach me a little humility, to punish me for building something on my own without their name attached to it." A new slide appeared, an email chain between Vincent Burke and Claudia. Then one more, a voice memo transcribed and captioned with a note from my mother. Make it loud. Let her burn publicly. Then we'll pick her up once she's learned her place. My voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from fury so sharp it blurred the edge of my tongue. Let me be clear, I said. This wasn't just betrayal. It was psychological warfare, disguised as parental discipline. It was an operation. More murmurs, more stares. The first signs of guests standing to leave, unsure if they were witnessing a scandal or a revolution. And yet, I continued, they didn't stop at sabotage. They ensured no company in Boston would hire me, using back channels to poison my name. They orchestrated an arranged marriage to a man they believed to be a humble, forgettable employee of their lawyer's firm, someone they assumed wouldn't challenge their control. I glanced at Graham, who stood quietly just off stage. And that, perhaps, was their final miscalculation. He stepped forward, slow and composed, taking the second mic. The screens behind us changed again, now showing headlines about Helios strategies, Forbes articles, global acquisition charts. This is my husband, I said, not the paralegal they believed he was. This is Graham Foster, founder and CEO of Helios Strategies, estimated net worth $6.8 billion, and the man who taught me that legacy means nothing if it costs you your soul. Graham spoke only once. Sometimes, in business, deception is used for defense, but in families, it's a sign of rot. Then he stepped back.
My mother stood, knocking her chair backward. "You've hijacked our anniversary," she barked. "You're humiliating your family in front of the entire city." "I'm telling the truth," I replied, staring her down, "and that's something this family has never tolerated well." She turned to my father, whose face had gone an unhealthy red. "Do something," she hissed. But my father just sat there. For once, he looked old, not powerful, not commanding, just a man watching everything he built get peeled away brick by dishonest brick. The final slide came up on the screens, my original boutique concept, with stamped approvals from 3 independent consultants, now resurfaced. Reports that confirmed it would have thrived if it hadn't been sabotaged. "I'm not here for vengeance," I said into the quiet. "I'm here for reclamation of my name, of my story, of my damn dignity." And then, beside me, Isabel stepped forward. She wasn't on the program, she wasn't dressed for war, but she came anyway, trembling slightly, eyes burning. "I saw the emails too," she said, voice quivering but firm. "I kept quiet because I was afraid, but I won't be anymore." A pause, and then she turned to the crowd. "Everything Elena said is true." You could feel the final thread snap, the collective unraveling of the Worthington myth. Guests shifted, some left in silence, others stayed to watch it all collapse. Vivian stormed out. Harold followed, stumbling. I stepped down from the stage. Not victorious, not untouched, but finally, undeniably seen. Graham met me at the bottom of the stairs and whispered, "You did it." I whispered back, "We did." And the weight I'd carried for years, heavy as inheritance, finally slid from my shoulders like a gown no longer mine to wear. The headlines started before we even got home. Worthington legacy in crisis. Daughter exposes parents in Gala showdown. Billionaire husband reveals family betrayal live on stage. By the time I slipped off my heels in our apartment, my name was trending, not for scandal, but for something dangerously close to respect. Graham monitored everything from his phone with the same calm precision he applied to market volatility. Meanwhile, I sat cross-legged on the couch, hair falling out of its pins, trying to process what had just happened.
Reactions are split, he said, scrolling through a mix of social commentary and investor blogs. The press doesn't know whether to praise your courage or clutch their pearls. I can live with confusion, I murmured. Confusion, he replied, is the precursor to change. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, hollow, maybe, but not broken. It was as if shedding the facade of the good daughter had left me raw, but finally mine. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet kitchen and a hand-delivered envelope slipped under our door. It was from my parents' attorney. A proposal. Polished, cold, predictable. It outlined reconciliation terms, a neutral statement to be released to the press, carefully curated language to suggest family differences magnified by miscommunication, and a staged photo opportunity in the Worthington Garden to honor the value of unity during times of adversity. There were non-disclosure agreements, timelines for re-entry into the family trust, and, I nearly laughed out loud, a clause about repurposing Elena's platform to promote family philanthropy. Graham read through it with a raised brow. They're offering you a role in your own redemption arc, as long as you don't write the script. I slid the proposal into the trash without a word. That night, I met Isabel in a quiet bar downtown. She looked tired, like someone who had just emerged from smoke after years in a burning house. But there was a lightness to her, too, something that hadn't been there before. "They're unraveling," she said simply. "Mom's already called half her charity board trying to spin the story. Dad won't leave the study. Delilah Whitmore canceled their annual Aspen trip." I sipped my drink. Good. She leaned in, quieter now. "You know she's going to turn on me next." "Let her," I said. "She can't stop you anymore." Graham helped Isabel secure her own apartment that same week, a sunlit corner unit downtown with too much character and not enough furniture, but she cried when she signed the lease. It was the first thing she'd ever signed in her own name, for herself. "You don't owe them any more chapters," I told her. "Start a new book." Meanwhile, my old life, the prepackaged one, kept falling apart in the rear view. The Worthington board called an emergency session to reevaluate leadership roles. Vincent Burke resigned quietly, though not before liquidating several offshore accounts. My mother stepped down from 2 charity boards, citing family health concerns. The mansion on Beacon Hill went eerily quiet. No more parties, no piano recitals in the foyer, no press. But I wasn't done with the past yet. I had one more ghost to confront. I returned to my old boutique space, the narrow storefront with the high ceilings and Italian light fixtures I'd handpicked. It had been leased out since Claudia fled, but it was now sitting empty, the windows covered in brown paper. I stood there for a long time, forehead resting against the glass. And then I pulled out my phone. 2 calls later, I had a new lease in motion. 3 days after that, Olivia Chen, the designer who had made my dress for the gala, joined me for coffee. "I want to start again," I told her. "Not just a boutique, something bigger." She listened, like she always had. Then she nodded. "I'm in." With Graham's help, but not his money, by my request, I began drafting a new business plan, one with independent funding, sustainable sourcing, and a mentoring arm for emerging designers. I called it Ember, because that's what I'd been. Not ashes, not flames, but something alive beneath it all. Marjorie helped me vet investors. Graham reviewed contracts, but never imposed. For the first time, I was making decisions that no one else could claim ownership over. 2 weeks after we signed the final lease, Graham took me to his real home, not the apartment we'd been living in, but a penthouse overlooking the harbor, filled with books, sun, and steel and glass quiet. "I bought this years ago," he said. "Never used it. I didn't have anyone to share it with." The view was breathtaking, but it wasn't the windows that made me pause. It was the kitchen, stocked and warm, the walls lined with recipe books and copper pans, not for display, but for use. "You cook?" I asked. "When I need to remember I'm human." We stayed there that night. No separate beds, no distance, just the sound of harbor wind and the quiet rhythm of trust beginning to take root. Later, lying beside him, I asked, "Did you ever think this would be real? Us?" He looked at me, no pretense. "No, I thought we'd survive each other. I didn't know we'd find each other." I fell asleep in his arms, not as a Worthington, not as a failed heiress or a scandal headline, but as myself, uncurated, undeleted, unafraid. The following Sunday, Isabel came over with takeout and her laptop. We sat on the living room floor, me, Graham, and Izzy, eating dumplings and listening to Olivia pitch her ideas for Ember's launch collection. She was glowing. "You know," Isabel said suddenly, "you're the reason I'm finally free." I shook my head. "No, you are. You just needed someone to hold the door open." We toasted with cheap wine, laughed until we couldn't breathe. It was small, simple, honest. And that night, for the first time in years, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because I realized I was the one holding it. Exactly 1 year after the gala, the night I set fire to the narrative my family had written for me, Graham and I started a tradition of our own. No gala, no flash, just the two of us, dinner at the quiet neighborhood restaurant we discovered during our arranged marriage phase, back when I was still wearing bruises under designer makeup and he was pretending not to be a billionaire. We didn't need the penthouse that night. We needed the place with mismatched chairs and that one server who always remembered my order and called Graham sir no matter how many times he asked her not to. Over candlelight and soft jazz, he reached across the table and took my hand. "You know," he said, "I thought this story would end a lot differently." "How?" I asked, smiling. "More divorce lawyers, less dumplings." I laughed, the kind of full-bodied, throat-open laugh I hadn't allowed myself during the years I spent surviving my own life. I thought I'd end up alone, or worse, obedient. He leaned in, quieter now. "Do you ever regret it, telling the truth that way, so publicly?" I didn't hesitate. "No." "Even with everything it cost you?" "I lost what I was never meant to keep," I said, "and I got back what I never thought I deserved." I still saw my parents from time to time, from a distance, carefully. Once at a fundraising event where my mother wore pearls like armor and nodded at me like I was a foreign dignitary. My father avoided eye contact. We didn't speak. That was okay. The reconciliation they had proposed was never real. It was a photo op, a return to appearances. And I didn't want appearances anymore. I wanted real. Isabel thrived. She moved into a new role at a small, sustainable architecture firm and started dating a woman named Malia who made her laugh so hard she'd text me punchlines hours later. Our bond was imperfect, messy, but real in a way we never had as kids. Because now it wasn't about competing for our mother's approval. It was about building something outside of her shadow. Ember launched 6 months after the gala. The fashion world called it a quiet revolution. And that was exactly what I wanted it to be. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, honest, and thoughtfully built. Olivia designed, I curated. Young designers applied in droves for our mentorship incubator, hungry for a space that didn't ask them to sell their soul for shelf space. Graham stood beside me every step, not as a puppet master, but as a partner. He challenged me, believed in me, and most importantly, let me fall and rebuild without trying to rescue me. That, I've learned, is the greatest form of love. Not saving someone, but seeing them, truly seeing them, and letting them rise on their own. People often ask me if I'd go back and do it differently, if I'd skip the boutique, the scandal, the marriage. I used to say yes. Now I don't. Because the boutique gave me courage, the scandal gave me clarity, and the marriage, the one that began as an arrangement, gave me Graham. I started my story as a daughter. I became a cautionary tale. And now I'm something else entirely. Not perfect, not palatable, just Elena. And that, finally, is enough.
If this story stirred something in you, Anger, hope, clarity, or even just a moment of reflection. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Whether it's your take, your own story, or just a single word that captured how it made you feel. And if you're drawn to narratives about truth, transformation, and the strength it takes to reclaim your voice, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's more to come. Real stories, raw hearts, unfiltered redemption. Thank you for staying until the very last word. Your presence here means more than you know.